Check that you have all of your patterns. Front top, front facing, front waistband, back top, back facing, back waistband, sleeve, sleeve cuff, skirt placket, and skirt. On the front top panels, mark out the notches according to the paper pattern. Fold up the pleats and pin them to secure. Baste 0.5 cm from the waist. Mark out the notches according to the paper pattern. Fold up the pleats and pin them to secure. Baste 0.5 cm from the waist. Sew the front and back top panels together along the shoulder and the side seam with a 1 cm seam allowance. Sew the front and back facing at the shoulder with a 1 cm seam allowance. Align the facing to the neckline and sew them together with a 1 cm seam allowance. Grab a pair of scissors and snip into the seam allowances to reduce tension. Flip open the facing and understitch on the facing, making sure to catch on the seam allowances below. At the bottom of the sleeve cuff, fold it up by 1.5 cm and iron well. Then top stitch 1 cm from the folded edge. Following the lines on the paper pattern, shirr the fabric. Remember to adjust the stitch tension and the stitch length accordingly. Sew 2 rows of gathering stitch on the sleeve at the sleeve crown and the sleeve hem. Sew up the sleeve's side seam with a 1 cm seam allowance. Using the 2 rows of gathering stitch, gently gather the sleeve hem so that the size is suitable for your forearm. Tie a couple of knots to secure the gathering stitches so that the size remains fixed. Then evenly distribute the gathers. turn the sleeve inside out. Place the sleeve cuff against your forearm and find a suitable size. Sew up the sleeve cuff in your desired size. If you have plenty of excess fabric, feel free to trim it away now. Sew the sleeve and sleeve cuff panels together, making sure to match up the seams. Sew the unfinished side of the sleeve cuff and the unfinished side of the sleeve hem together with a 1 cm seam allowance. Attach the sleeve to the armhole with a 1 cm seam allowance. Pull on the gathering stitch to form gathers along the sleeve crown, focusing most of the gathers close to the shoulder seam. Fold in the front facing and baste it down 0.5 cm along the waist. With a 1 cm seam allowance, sew the tie sash panels together along 3 sides, leaving one short edge unsewn. Using a loop turner or a tool of your choice, turn the tie sash inside out. Then iron well. Top stitch along the sewn edges with a 0.5 cm seam allowance. Baste the open side of the completed tie sash to the back waistband with a 0.5 cm seam allowance. Centralize the tie sash so that it falls in the middle of the back waistband. Repeat for the other side with the other completed tie sash. Take the front waistband sandwiching the tie sash, sew 1 cm along the short edge. Repeat for the other side. For the front and back waistbands without interfacing, sew the front and back together along the sides with a 1 cm seam allowance. Sew 2 panels of skirt together with a 1 cm seam allowance. For the other 2 skirt panels, sew the skirt placket with a 1 cm seam allowance along the straight edge or the center front. Flip open the placket and understitch only on the placket, making sure to catch onto the seam allowances below. With the placket folded in, baste along the waist with a 0.5 cm seam allowance. Sew the front and back skirt panels together along the side seam with a 1 cm seam allowance. Sew 2 rows of gathering stitches along the top of the skirt. With the waistband panels as a guide, gently gather the skirt panels so that the front and the back matches up exactly. On the waistband, measure and mark 1 cm inwards from the short edge. This will be our starting an ending point. Sew the waistband and skirt together, making sure to start the skirt at the 1 centimeter marking and ending it at the 1 centimeter marking. Sew the top and waistband together, once again making sure to start exactly at the 1 centimeter marking and ending at the 1 centimeter marking. You'll be sewing them together with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Try to match up the side seams on the waistband and the top. To sew the inner waistband, flip down the top panel. At the seam where the top ends and the waistband starts, sew on the inner waistband, right side facing down. Sew both with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Try to match up the side seams. To seal up the waistbands, align them together and push away the top panels. Sew both waist panels together along the short edge with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Repeat this for the other side. Push away the top panel and sew them together with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Turn the waistbands inside out. If you find it too bulky, feel free to snip into the seam allowances before turning it inside out. To seal up the waistband, push up all the seam allowances of the skirt and fold down the inner waistband and iron well. On the right side, in the seam just where the skirt meets the waistband, sew in the ditch from one side all the way to the other. When double checking, make sure that the seams are pushed up and that your stitch is catching onto the inner waistband below. Fold up the skirt hem by 1.5 cm and iron well. Then top stitch 1 cm from the folded edge. For the finishing touches, add buttons or buttonholes to secure the opening of the dress. And there you have it, your dress is completed.